Greetings and welcome to the Black and Buddhist Summit. My name is Pamela Ayo-Yatunde, and I am, along with Cheryl A. Giles, one of the co-editors of the book Black and Buddhist, What Buddhism Can Teach Us About Race, Resilience, Transformation, and Freedom. I want to open our summit with words of appreciation to all the authors who contributed to our book and all the authors who are contributing to this summit. I also want to thank Shambhala Publications, the Awake Network, and our summit partners, including Barry Center for Buddhist Studies, Brooklyn Zen Center, the Buddhist Ministry Initiative at Harvard Divinity School, Center of the Heart, Lion's Roar, Naropa University, New York Zen Center, North Atlantic Books, Thich Nhat Hanh Program for Engaged Buddhism at Union Theological Seminary, and Wise Compassion. Thank you all for your encouragement. Thank you for spreading the word, and thank you for bringing the summit to life. We are honored to have Spring Washam open this summit. Spring is a Dharma teacher in the Insight tradition, co-founder of the East Bay Meditation Center, and author of the book A Fierce Heart, Finding Strength, Courage, and Wisdom in Any Moment. Spring is what I call an inter-realm traveler, a soul journer, shamanistic. So now I'm going to read a passage from her book, A Fierce Heart. And this is starting on page 83, where she's talking about going from one retreat center to another to get even deeper into solitude and simplicity. My cabin had a small solar panel, so I had a tiny fridge and lights for a couple of hours in the evening. There was a wood-burning stove, and when I got cold, I went out and got wood to make a fire. The caretaker brought food and water up every 10 days, and I would meet him halfway up the rutty road. That was my only human contact. I decided against having a cell phone, and there was no internet connectivity. I wanted to meditate like a true yogi. So there I was in this very isolated cabin with an outhouse, a propane burner, a cushion, an altar, and a few Dharma books. When I'd first heard about the cabin from the nun, I envisioned my retreat as a series of beautiful moments, connecting with the earth with no one around to distract me. I imagined long periods of blissed out meditation. Setting up the space, though, I began to have second thoughts. Still, I encouraged myself. Spring, you're here. You know the Dharma. It's time to rely on yourself. If times get hard, you can be your own refuge. I thought the worst that could happen would be a feeling, that I would have to feel something. Okay, I thought, I'll feel whatever comes up. I can do this. But the moment the caretaker got in his truck and headed back down the hill, I instantly plummeted into the most painful sorrow I'd ever known. Oceans of tears interrupted by overwhelming terror. Every day, tears poured down my cheeks, my chest ached, and my body was filled with grief. I started sobbing in the morning, and it went on for hours in waves. It was huge, and it kept getting bigger. I didn't understand where it was coming from. It was as though 10,000 years of ancestral sorrow was coming straight through my heart, and so I called it African grief. African grief. Yes, African grief. Today, Spring is bringing some of that African spirit through herself to us by way of the Church of Harriet Tubman and the Underground Railroad crew.
Oh, thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. And thank you all. I feel very honored and happy to be with everyone this morning. I feel inspired by this topic, and I feel that these gatherings of people of African ancestry and the Buddhist tradition coming together, having these meetings and these opportunities to get together and share from our books, share from our hearts are really, really important. I was just saying off offline that I hope that in 2022 we can actually begin to have these things in person as well. And I want to start off by saying that I think a lot of the inspiration, I know for Pamela, that a lot of the inspiration came when we had a gathering a couple of years ago. It was about 30 of us, and it included Lama Rod and Angel Kyoto and Conda Mason, and many of you who are online, Ruth King. And I remember it was 30 of us, and we were gathered in New York City, not far from the Apollo Theater, and it was a 2-day gathering. It was very historical, and we were there together in the seminary, and we were talking about being Black and Buddhist. And one of the things that stood out to me about that conversation is that we kept pointing to this idea of feeling that some part of us was dismembered, not disembodied, but actually physically dismembered. Something was cut off. I remember at one point we drew a picture and it was like our limbs were chopped off. We weren't fully in our bodies. We never got to figure out the healing to that. It was just a pointing out of something very profound that I think each of us in our own way resonated with. I know for me, I really resonated with that. What is cut off? For me, I've been studying Buddhism for over 20 years. And there was always a part of me that was left out, but I didn't realize it. I didn't realize that at that conference that we had a couple years ago, that there was a deeper investigation that needed to happen within my own heart. And I think when things began to come together is when I began to really have this very profound connection to Harriet Tubman. So I want to skip to earlier last year, right after uh, George Floyd was killed. Because that week where George Floyd was murdered, and then we had Breonna Taylor, and then we had Ahmaud Arbery, and we had so much happening at that moment. That's when the spirit of Harriet Tubman really came to me. And it was so unexpected, like so many of us, I was kind of thrown about the pandemic. My whole retreat was canceled. I'd planned on living in Peru. I wasn't even going to live in the US. I had no plans in 2020 of being in the US. Mostly I was going to be in South America leading my shamanic retreats. But as we know, all of our plans, changed at that moment. And then I had to figure out where to shelter down. So at that time, I was near Spirit Rock, and I was in this very, very deep state of grief around those murders, around what was happening. And I began to really pray. I mean, pray with my whole heart. Give me some guidance. I don't know how to deal with this grief that's arising. And it was intense. It was like what Pamela just read from my book. It was this old African grief. It was a mix of rage and despair and powerlessness. And I began to, meditate and take refuge in Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. But that didn't feel like it was enough. And so in a period of about a week, I began having these profound visions of Harriet Tubman. Harriet was rescuing me. I would wake up in this panic. I'd be having a dream of being on a road, running, running, running. And I could hear, like, it was almost like these ghosts were chasing me, and images of the KKK and Nazis. And I could feel myself running. And I was always holding on to the back of something. It was like a rope pulling me. And it took me a few dreams before I realized, wait a minute, I'm holding on to Harriet Tubman's dress. And I began to have this connection with this ancestor. And it was really magical and very profound. And in the daytime, I started listening to gospel music and singing and praying, and I would start shaking my rattle and singing old songs like "Ain't Nobody Gonna Turn Me Around" and "Eye on the Prize." And I realized at that moment in my despair, it was that I wanted to turn toward. It was that was giving me a sense of solace, a sense of wholeness. And so you could say that's where my journey with Harriet really began, as that this ancestor, I felt like she was really coming as a protector spirit, because I felt deeply afraid, deeply alone, lost, like so many of us. I mean, this was a common phenomenon. I'm not alone in that. And as an African American woman, I felt like somehow the classical Buddhist narrative, I couldn't find my ground in it, right? I needed Harriet on my altar, right? I needed to take refuge in my ancestor, right? In this freedom fighter and somebody who had been, in the belly of the beast and had a message for me, had a message for all of us. And so, really, that is how my journey first started. And over time, this connection got deeper and deeper. I started to feel Harriet with me, especially the times where I would listen to music and dance, and especially the gospel songs and Mahalia Jackson and, On My Way to Canaan Land. I got this overwhelming desire to just be in that energy, and I would feel almost like Harriet was holding my hand, and saying, "You're gonna get through this. This is gonna be all right." And so what happened there was that I was talking to a friend, and my friend said, "Well, why don't you just do a class on the Dharma of Harriet Tubman? Why don't you just talk about your experiences and let's bring out the wisdom of Harriet?" And I thought, okay, that's a good idea. Yeah, the Dharma of Harriet, because that's the Dharma I needed, right? I mean, sitting and doing my compassion practice was beautiful, but it wasn't enough, right? It didn't feel like I was meeting the moment. And I needed an answer. I needed a direction. I needed an understanding, on a whole different level. My body needed something. I mean, my body was in a state of collapse during that time, right? I would shake all night long and I was having all these physical things. It was just the stress, when you see your people murdered on television, on a video, it does something to us, right? It does something to the heart. It collapses something internally. And um, so I'm just giving you a little background story about how the church and this broader message is coming through me. So I put on the 5-week class, and I remember just sending it out online. Suddenly the event went viral, I guess. People were forwarding it. I could see people sharing the event 500 times. I would see it go out and out and out. And, within 2 weeks, we had sold 750 tickets and then given away another couple hundred tickets because I was giving them away to anybody. And our first class, we had hundreds of people online interested. And I remember during that 5 weeks, I talked about Harriet's legacy, her power, her ability to meet the moment, her resiliency, I think, and I'm going to tell some stories in a moment about her unbelievable ability to stay resilient through whatever happened. And so during that 5-week class, and we played gospel songs and we danced, and I had slideshows, and I shared all of these different things with everybody that I was studying. And I had no connection really to Harriet Tubman prior to this. I mean, I had watched her movie. I mean, I loved it. Who doesn't like a Harriet Tubman movie? But this wasn't someone I had studied in, even in school. I mean, I knew, but it wasn't this like heart connection. It wasn't this sense of, wow, this ancestor is here. We are communicating, it's like the Aborigines call the dream time or the veils. part in the ancestor world, in this world, they come together. This can happen at times, right? There's a collapse, and like everything was collapsing at that time. So the 5-week class was really amazing, and just so happened that my publisher, Hay House, who I was writing a book for, another book, my second book for them, it was a shamanic book about healing. The vice president was on the class, taking the class, and called me and said, Spring, stop writing what you're writing and write a book about Harriet Tubman and the underground and the awakening of her spirit and what this could mean for today. Right. And so I was like, write a book about Harriet Tubman. Like, I mean, I remember feeling like, I'm not up for a task like this. I don't have that in me. I'm a Buddhist teacher who, does shamanic retreats in Peru. And, I write about mindfulness and healing. And what I realized at that moment was that there was all this information that I didn't know about who I was. So I remember I said yes to this assignment from the spirit world. I remember having a dream and talking to Harriet, and Harriet was like, "Yep, write this book." And I was like, I tried to talk her out of it. Like, I'm not the one. You should call Ta-Nehisi Coates, Alice Walker. I don't have the background. I dropped out of college. I don't think I can do this. And I remember just having this feeling of Harriet saying, yes, you can, and you will learn, and you will grow. And so this was in August, and I said yes to it. And then this is the interesting part that I think for all of us is really important. What I had realized is over the last 20 years, 20 plus years, is that when I became Buddhist, there was a part of me that had left my African American side behind. It's like we emulate our Asian teachers, we emulate this new tradition. And I couldn't, even though I said on the outside, even being a founder of East Bay Meditation Center and focused on communities of color, there was still a way within me, like I didn't understand myself. And I can remember being younger and thinking, okay, I need to study my history. I need to understand. I need to read all these books. I remember Alice Walker once gave me a list of all these books, Black liberation theology and Betty Shabazz and, all these historical teachings and writings, and I never read them. Well, I didn't know that I needed to read them then. I think I did, but I didn't know it in my heart. It's like you don't know what you're missing. That was the part that was dismembered, right? There was a gap somewhere in me. And as much as I could sit on the seat and practice mindfulness, there was a lack of wholeness in that, right? I think a mistake that we make, I think, is that we leave our Blackness aside when we adopt a tradition, right? Or we can't find our place in it, right? How does this being in a Black body influence my Dharma practice? And so over the last 5 months has been this like, it's been like a graduate program. I've read every possible book that you could think of, from slave narratives to Ta-Nehisi Coates to all three biographies of Frederick Douglass and the narratives of Sojourner Truth. And what it has done is it's almost like it's put me back together again. And again, I didn't know that I was missing this. And I think this is the thing when we grow up in a white supremacist environment, and that's filtered into an all white Buddhist environment, right? Where our conditioning toward anti Blackness is even there, right? It's even there. How could it not be? It's not, it's no one's trying, to inflict racism. It's in the water. It's in our consciousness. And so I had adopted that, even though I didn't see it, even though I didn't fully understand it, something still inside of me hurt. And so I think when Harriet came to rescue me, that's, my first chapter title is called Harriet Rescues Me. It's very symbolic and it's very archetypal because yes, she was rescuing me as I was running down the road, but she was also rescuing a part of me that was cut off, right? Where in me are the programs of anti-blackness, right? Because as I've been studying and observing, it's like I'm pulling out pieces of the program. It's like I'm pulling out, it feels like sometimes I just pull these shards of glass out of my heart, right? It's like, oh, I too was deeply conditioned, right? As I sat on my seat in meditation, I'm running the program unconsciously. And through understanding the historical pieces and putting it in context, like, the struggle for Black liberation is so interconnected with the struggle of awakening, of humanity's awakening. And so to leave that narrative behind, I think is what severs something. I think it's what we were looking for, at least me, I can only speak for myself, when we had our gathering at Garrison and we kept on being like, why are we drawing, arms with no hands and necks with no heads and torsos with no legs? Like, what is that? And I realized that that's a big piece for me, is how do I embody, honor, and know that my historical, ancestral journey, being a child of the diaspora, affect me as a Buddhist? How does that cosmology fit in with who I am? So this was a really important piece that I began to understand only here. I know it's shocking, but only really in the last 6 months. And I think that that's what's happening for a lot of us. It's like, as these programs of white supremacy are breaking open, they operate on two levels. The oppressor and the oppressed are dancing together, right? It's like one doesn't exist without the other in a way, right? We both have to believe in the narrative. I'm inferior, you're superior, we dance. When one person stops believing, it's like the jig is up, checkmate, And I think what I was learning from Harriet and her life is that Harriet never believed in the program of white supremacy. She never felt that because she was Black, because she was a woman, that she was inferior. It was like she had this immunity from that. She was like, no, I'm free. I'm supposed to be free. I will be free. And I think just studying that and embodying that, it was like, yes, Harriet was free of the programming, of the narrative of the day. Born a slave, die a slave. Born Black, die Black. End of story, right? It's such a pitiful story that, people try to give. And one of the other things that I've discovered in all of this study that I've been doing, and I'm still very deep in it, I'll spend the rest of my life studying. It's like a door opened, and each thing I read, each thing I understand, it's like the hands coming back. Oh, yes, here's my hand, or, my foot is back, right? It's like the pieces of myself, which is so unexpected. So magical, because again, you don't know what you don't know. And sometimes it's very hard to figure out where the hurt really is. And so, and I know it's a cliche when everyone says, yes, study your history and you'll feel free. Well, studying history is also to study the truth. And it's brutal at times. There's times I cried and I wept, and I reading these narratives on people on the underground. I have these huge volumes from William Still, who was the father of the underground. He was the one who was the one who collected all the stories. He was the one who heard them and wrote them. He was the record keeper of the stories. He wrote Harriet's story when she crossed into Philadelphia, right? And to read the narratives was heartbreaking. But also what I learned from that is it gave me this tremendous love, the pride in our people. Oh my God, like our people are so amazing. So on one hand, it breaks you down. And on the other, it built me up by studying this history, studying like where you came from, like resilient. You want to talk about resiliency? Read slave narratives of those who escaped, And it started to like fortify me, like, yes, I felt so strong and so proud. I mean, I could really cry when I think about the African American experience and our people. Ah! I just get this sense of like, it's unbelievable, the ancestors, and unbelievable what we can do when we become free of the program, free to be who we are, fully in our body. Like it's an unstoppable force. And I believe that Harriet Tubman and the spirits of the underground are back to show us this. The work isn't done, right? Harriet came the first time around, right? Her goal, abolish slavery, done in her lifetime. She died a free woman on her own land. Okay, that's very important. Born a slave, died a free woman on her own land. But the program didn't die. They abolished slavery, but the mind program isn't done yet, right? The prison of the mind of it is not done. And we've seen it as it's made a resurgence into the mainstream. It's very dangerous as we've been living these last 5 years. This administration that just left, they left, but they're not gone. Again, they were defeated, but this is not defeated. The program is not defeated, right? They won another political battle, which is important to win, important to win. But at the end of the day, the war is with the consciousness of this programming, the white supremacists, the illusion of white supremacy. Let me clarify that. And how does that affect us as Dharma practitioners awakening to freedom, right? What are we practicing, right? We too are uprooting programs, right? We are recognizing, if we look at the Buddha's heart of the Buddha's message, right, is that we're already enlightened and we forgot, right? That's the heart of it. We're in a process of remembering who we really are, remembering, and the veils of illusion are these programs, and the veils of greed and hatred and delusion, right, are the narratives that are falling. And so for African American people, this is a big piece of our healing work. And it's a jewel, I believe. It's a jewel because somehow the Black experience is a universal experience. Alice Walker, I remember we taught a day long. This was maybe about 5 years ago, 6 years ago. We did a day long for women of African American ancestry at EVMC. So we're in downtown Oakland. There's about the event was, sadly we only could fit 130 people, and I think we had about 140 of us squeezed in. We're sitting like side by side, and Alice was giving a lot of teachings on Black liberation theology, basically. And I remember she looked at everyone and she said, it will be a Black woman. It will be Black people and a Black woman who will save this world. I remember we all were like, oh, and she said, you know why? It's our karma, And there was something about that at the time that really resonated, it was like, wow, right. Because somehow our struggle is this universal struggle, and our ability to uproot the program of white supremacy within ourselves, knowing that creates a collapse, right? Anytime, the dance, one falls, the system collapses, right? The oppressor, the oppressed, right? The perpetrator, the victim, when one falls out, the whole system, right? It starts to wobble, it starts to fall. And so I think we're seeing the beginning of this. I think it's set in motion step by step by step. And I think we're at a really pivotal place. And so Harriet Tubman says, I'm back again. My book is about her being back and about how we can utilize her power, how we can embody that power, right? This unstoppable force, right? And her mantra was always, I'm not free until my people are free. So intertwined was this very deep, profound sense of bodhicitta, for the benefit of all beings, right? I really write as a way to say Harriet is a prophet that has not been fully recognized. She always embodied the spirit of Moses. To her, the African American people enslaved were the Israelites. She didn't know in the early days that she was Moses, but she evolved into that. On 10 years of her missions to rescue enslaved people, back and forth as a conductor, right? She risked her life. I mean, the stories we know on some level, and I'll write about them, and to try to evoke what could be in the mind of someone who is going back to rescue others, right? It's the danger and the desire. I'm not free until my people are free. I'm not free until we're all free, right? And such a beautiful, it's not even, the word beautiful doesn't even cover it. It's beyond. It's a force of compassion. It's a force of compassion that is fully manifested, fully embodied. It's, there's stages of compassion, right? We have the baby stage is that we feel compassionate. uh when we start to take our compassion out into the world as action, it becomes fully developed. I call it Maha compassion, great compassion, right? Because then it begins to animate us. And so many of our ancestors, so many of us we had that. That's in our DNA. It's not just all trauma. Yes, there's a lot of trauma, but I think as part of our awakening is also to take those gifts, because we know they're there. We feel them. The resiliency of African American people is just beyond measure, right? Our ability to meet each moment. And Harriet, is back because we are in a stage that is somewhat dangerous for African American people, for Black people all over the world, right? As the program has made it's made a comeback. It's never went away, right? But now we have a whole different narrative, right? Instead of Jim Crow laws, we have gerrymandering and voter suppression, right? Instead of the KKK in hoods, we have the alt-right in suits, right? Dressed up, right? There's all these things that are back. It's like the Confederacy, the flags being waved in the White House, and the battle over Confederate statues, right? It's back. We are back in time. And Harriet keeps saying that we're back in time. And I'm here because there's another battle on the horizon. But it's a battle of the mind now. Maybe people will die on all the times in battles. There is death and there is destruction. But a lot of this is mental. It's the prison of the mind. It's Mara in the mind. Can we awaken from the program? Can we love ourselves? Can we see ourselves as free people, deserving, right? I think some level, as I've done a lot of soul searching in the last few months, I realized the places where I don't feel confident. As I mentioned, I'm pulling out these pieces, and it started to happen. I'll tell you, I had very profound experiences just saying Black Lives Matter over and over again to myself, right? I would sit and I would say Black Lives Matter, and I would find where in my body it wasn't vibrating as truth yet. I would say Black Lives Matter, Spring. And I could feel the part. I love Black. I love those three words because they expose ourselves to ourselves. That's why racists can't even, they can't even get it out, right? It's like, checkmate, right? It's like a koan. Saying Black Lives Matters is a Zen koan, right? It's the unanswerable question, you know? And so I remember I used to meditate. This was in the summer, saying Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter. And I would say it deep, deep in my spirit, Black Lives Matter, right? And I would start to feel this sense of wholeness coming back, the parts that, you know, again, had been chopped off. So I think as Black people, being in the Buddhist tradition, there has to be a way that we bring our whole selves to our practice. We cannot teach, and going forward, I think this has so profoundly changed me that I cannot teach in the same way now. The heart of the Dharma is forever the same, but how I'm conditioned into teaching, how I'm conditioned to think about it myself, how, the subtleties of the white supremacy involved in these communities, right? Dampers our voice, dampers our stories. We don't want to be too Black, but we need to be, you know. I'll never forget. I'll never forget when we were actually at this 2-day conference. I don't think Lama Rod's gonna be too. He's a friend, upset that I'm saying this, but I remember it was at the beginning of the conference, and we were all sitting very kind of uptight, like, with our different outfits on and the Zen and the this, and, and we were all kind of, playing this role of being very still. And I remember Lama Rod said, is this a Black and Buddhist conference or what? What are we doing? Are we gonna be ourselves, or are we gonna play the role? Right? And the role, what is the role? And so I think that we have to really think about that, and to be unabashedly who we are. The world is longing for our authenticity. It is longing for our wisdom. If it will be the Black community and African American people who saves this world, then we need to step up. We need to share what we know. We need to embody that. And I think the Dharma was so beautiful is it can help us, but there's a piece that we cannot leave out. We can no longer leave it out. And it may be that the reprogramming is, and this is what I'm thinking about as a Buddhist teacher, how do I do retreats in a different way? How do I give Dharma talks in a different way? How do I point things out in a different way? Because as I become deprogrammed, the whole structures around all of us become reprogrammed, right? And we're influenced by this. Even the best of us, we have this in us because it's the water we drink in the US. It's the water we bathe in, right? So we are going against the stream by uprooting these programs. There is a force. And I think that is why Harriet is also back. She's like, there's a force that's needed, honey. There's a battle, and there's some leadership that is needed to navigate these next few years, which could be very choppy, very bumpy, right? So many lies, so much delusion. And this is where the beauty of the Dharma, right? We apply it to what we know. We apply it to our hearts. And these battles are waged non-violently, right? The battle of truth, right? Versus fiction. We're at a crossroads here, delusion and truth, compassion, hatred, right? Humanity has been at this crossroads, right? It's which way do we go? And we know that in that long haul, Harriet won the first time, the underground won the first time, will win again. But there's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of work to be done. And so, this conversation for me is a very interesting one as I grapple with, my love of the Dharma, and then this new found incredible power that comes from this Black liberation theology that is rooted, that has brought a sense of wholeness back into my being, right? Of course it would. Yes, of course it would. But again, you don't know what you don't know. You're looking around for something, you know? It's like Havis who loses the key. You know, the story where Havis is outside and he's on the ground looking for a key. And his friend walks by and he said, "What are you looking for, Havis?" And Havis says, "I'm looking for my key." And his friend starts looking and they look everywhere. And then his friend says, I can't find it. Where did you lose it?" And Javi says, "I lost it in the house." And his friend's like, "Well, why are you looking out here?" He goes, "Well, here's the light." So, so many years I've been like looking for these pieces, you know, like, well, what is it? What is it? Oh, it's the program, right? Ultimately. So there's a lot of joy in me right now. There's a lot of happiness. There's a lot of reverence. There's a lot of sorrow of what has happened. And then ultimately, I think what Harriet's message is a message of hope, right? She's like, Harriet's like, "Honey, it's about the promised land." You know, I come back to lead the people to the promised land, right? And this word promised land is everywhere right now because we're back in time. Barack Obama's book, The Promised Land. People are talking about the land of Canaan. People are talking about Moses. People are talking about Abraham Lincoln like they've never had before, right? Because we are back in time. There's an old battle, right? But now it's more mental, right? They only can do a certain amount of damage with bullets and guns and police, right? But the police are losing power step by step. So now we have the mind battle, right? The battlefield, the chess match, what wins, right? And the more we know ourselves, the more we know our power, the more we embody Harriet. Harriet did not believe these programs. In fact, she was invincible on a lot of levels and very prophetic. She was completely unafraid to die, you know, which also is a mark of a prophet. Often people who are sort of awakened in that, they're pretty fearless when it comes to death because they don't see it as death. It's another aspect of evolution. It's another, you know, movement. It's another cycle, right? It's another train stop on the journey. In my first chapter of the book, I have these sessions with Harriet. She comes and she tells me things and I write them down. And she said, I asked Harriet, I said, "Harriet, where did you come from? Like, how did you do this? Where'd you come from?" And Harriet says, "Honey," well, she calls me child. Child, I've been here, I've been Moses for lifetimes. Do you think this was my first time? And I was like, you know, I just start crying, like, wow, okay, here we are. And Moses, the spirit is back. And so for me, this is what the Church of Harriet is, right? In the underground. And you know, I could give Dharma talks for days about every different person on the Underground Railroad, from you know, all of the ancestors, you know, John Brown and all these different people who put their lives on the line. A lot of white people. I have a chapter in my book that's coming out called Allies and the Abolitionists, right? Who every day were standing with Harriet, who funded the movement, who opened their homes, who drove people back and forth to safe houses. Um, so we have to understand that, you know, this is a, a movement and it involves Black people, brown people, Asian people, Latin people. This is like a global uprising. And it's a very hopeful message, I think. It's one that takes a lot of heart, but the Church of Harriet is about that. It's about telling these stories. So I had my 5-week class. I want to come back to kind of summarize before I get ready to end this talk. And as you see, I could talk about this so long because I'm so passionate about it. My 5-week class did not want to end, right? We had so many people. So I turned it in to the Church of Harriet and we continued on Sunday mornings. And that church, Sunday church, went all the way through till the end of November. After the election, after everything had been resolved, I stopped at that point because I needed to focus on writing the book. But my Sunday classes will come back. When my book comes out next year, I'll start it up again because I think there's so many stories to tell, so many things. The underground, rising is the spirit of resistance. And if you look at that internally, it's the resistance to the program, it's the interruption, right? Interrupt the narrative that we have about ourselves. So I think that's a very important piece for all of us as we study the Dharma, as we start to look at the pieces in our own hearts and minds that are programmed. I think that's what's so painful when people of color come into doing meditation in an all white setting, is I think the first thing that starts to arise in them is this racial program, right? I think the trauma of it. And it's so great to see now, after many years of leading groups and events for communities of color, to know what kind of environment is needed. And there's a certain kind of environment that's needed. And gatherings like this, coming together, Black and Buddhist, and talking, it's like a think tank, hearing conversations and then chewing them over. Again, my hope is that in the future we will have these online, but also huge amounts of people gathering to talk about the ideas. Spirit Rock had a gathering about maybe less than a year after the first one, and I was heartbroken that I could not go. I was in Peru. I couldn't get back in time to go. I was leading retreats. But that also was another profound step forward. So each time we get together as Black folks in the Black community and we weave in these Black liberation theologies, our ancestors, the power that they had to rise and to be resilient, right? When we merge it with the Dharma in a new way, I really think we're on to some kind of acceleration point right there. And I think we have to find that point of convergence in order to share this with the world and to a wider audience. We can't adopt a different culture. We can't adopt a different way. We have to be fully Black, fully embodied in that, fully loving that. And then we apply the Dharma to that, to those narratives. I think there's something deeply profound that could happen there. And also understanding that the ancestor pieces that we carry are hugely important. We're in their footsteps, and to honor that, and that becomes a part of our tradition. That becomes a part of our narrative. That's something that's been robbed of us in a way, assimilated. The whiteness doesn't have ancestors, right? White communities, it's me, myself, and I, right? Maybe they look at their dad, but it's not this lineage, sense of being that lineage. So I think it's really important that we carry this. And Harriet Tubman is our ancestor. And I will say that she's available. She's a guardian spirit. I think if that was what Harriet, at the end of my book, I will be depositing that, is Harriet is a protector spirit now, looking over everybody. She's like the North Star shining down. She's a protector. She is someone who was protecting beings her whole life, putting her lives on the line, actually leading beings, carrying a lamp through darkness, taking people step by step out of bondage, out of pain, out of suffering. So I think in many ways, I want to encourage everyone on Zoom, on YouTube, to call on this great spirit of ours, call on her to give us that power, that resiliency, and to help us crack the code in our own mind, right? The oppressor, the oppressed, the narrative, so that we become free of that step by step. Because, she wasn't influenced by that. She fought against that, fought in the Civil War, was a spy, led a raid, first first woman in history to lead a raid on the Combahee River. She had the troop of African American soldiers that she led, that where she was a general. This is no ordinary ancestor. This was one that was, for one thing, free. I'm not free until my people are free, and then moved it into action. So I feel tremendous love and gratitude that I'm chosen for this task, and I'm happy that I accepted it, even though it's been blood, sweat, and oceans of tears to try to write in this way, to give voice to something as important as this at this time, to tell the story of one of our greatest ancestors, and one of our greatest ancestors whose mind was free. Her mind was free. Yes, they might have enslaved her body at a period of time, but there was something in Harriet that she'd already cracked the code. She was already awake to something much higher, much more profound, connected to this deep compassion, connected to this universal consciousness, whether we call it Buddha nature, Christ consciousness, or the force, or cosmic energy, or Gaia, whatever you define it. When we're connected is when we have power, right? We're not operating in the program of the mind. We're not oppressed by all of the negativities and beaten down in the prison of that. Harriet was always free of that. And so I think her status, I intend to elevate the status and put her up on the same plane as the great bodhisattvas, because a lot of Black women are not, they're oppressed. So a historical figure like this, who was a slave, born, couldn't read or write, Black woman, I'm elevating. She's elevating. She already was elevated. So I think that that's a big part. And we're elevating too. We are growing in our own practices. But please let us all bring our totality, to bring our ancestors, to bring our spirit, to bring our love of Blackness, not the anti-Black, but the love of the culture and the enlightened part, the celebratory part, the free part. There's a part that's all of us. It always has this freedom to it. In the periphery, it's what makes us so. It's what animates us, our spirit. You can never get rid of that. You can oppress it, but you can't destroy it. It's who we are. And so I hope that as I open this conversation on this beautiful network and this beautiful conference and this gathering, I hope that we can bring Miss Tubman and the spirit of all the underground, the ones who resisted and disrupted the program, the narrative, the storyline, right? And I give thanks to all of you, and I hope that this is just a joyful time. I'm honored to be a part of it. And Om Mani Padme Hum, and deep compassion and wisdom. Thank you all so much.